welcome. How many are freelancers or business owners? Large majority. Okay, so sales, product, marketing, all that is familiar with you all, right? So I'll be talking a bit about that. GTM is go-to-market, right? How you take a new product or an existing product and take it to a new market, right? To a new audience, something that you haven't explored yet. There's a concept called leaky buckets. I'll talk about that, how that kind of fuses into this concept of growth loops. And so let's get started. All right, so first up is go-to-market strategy, right? So how do you come up with a strategy to take your product, take your services somewhere where it's not currently at the moment? So first of all, a strategy is not a plan or a roadmap, right? A strategy is basically a set of decisions that you need to make around all these different topics. Those are all things you have to consider when you're taking it to a new market, right? So let's say you're in Portugal, you want to expand to Germany. So how are you going to price it? What sort of sales tactics will you use? What sort of distribution channels? Yeah. Who are your customers? What is their user journey with your product? What does that look like? Those are all things that go into coming up with a go-to-market strategy. I won't be talking too much in detail about that, but just to set the stage, yeah, this is kind of what we're talking about. A plan or roadmap, on the other hand, is a list of activities that you've decided you're going to do. Right? A strategy is a set of decisions you need to make. That's the difference. So the elements, there's 3 elements of a go-to-market strategy: product, sales, and marketing. Job already highlighted quite a bunch of things you need to do for sales, right? So customer discovery, understanding their pain point, those are all crucial elements. When you're talking about upmarket products, you also want to think about B2C versus B2B products, right? So who are you catering to individuals, end users, or large organizations, and you're selling accounts to them? Those are all things you need to think about for the sales side of things. Also, service level agreements, right? The things on the contract you agree to. In the marketing side of things, you want to understand who your target audience is, what sort of marketing channels you're going to use to target them, more traditional ones, or newer ones with social media, internet, influencer marketing, all that stuff. And then lastly, product, right? So this is the thing that you're selling that will solve that pain point like Job talked about. So you need to be very clear about how your product is different from the competitors, right? So what can you bring to the table that is not out there yet? Or how can you solve a problem that someone has, but just differently than your competitors? So those 3 elements are, at an overview, the things you want to be thinking about when you take a product to a new market. So growth loops, anyone familiar with growth loops? Maybe you've worked with them, maybe you've created them. It's a relatively new concept, last 5-ish years. Sales funnels, again, Job hinted at that. I'm not going to go too much into this, right? So you have the steps of how you want to take in a customer and then walk them through the product to realize the value. Yeah? So typically you have awareness, interest, decision, and then action where they either continue using your product or they say, nah, this is not for me. There are some drawbacks to this, right? So this is a traditional sales funnel. There's some limitations to that. One is that it's not so helpful in long-term relationship building. This is especially true for B2B SaaS products, where you're really trying to connect with the pain points of the organization, which is going to evolve. The funnel really tries to direct a customer or an account top to bottom, right? This is your intent with the sales funnel. Get them through as efficiently as possible. The issue with that is you do have to have active touch, meaning someone has to actively walk the customer through. Firstly, awareness, right? So you maybe do a cold call, you see that they could be interested in it, write down their interest, right? What parts of the product would they be interested in using and learning more about? Then they make a decision. So you're walking them through different steps of your product. So it's very high energy. You need people to firstly be familiar with the product, secondly be familiar with your customer so that they can connect those two and walk them through that. So So those are some of the limitations of a very traditional sales funnel. Loops, on the other hand, are what companies are building now. So B2C, B2B SaaS products especially. The idea behind the growth loop is that it's more than the sum of its parts. I'll go into what a growth loop is in a bit. It's self-reinforcing, meaning that one action of a user feeds into the experience of the next user, right? So through product usage, your customers are making your product better for you, right? And that's the secret sauce, secret recipe behind growth loops. And lastly, it leverages this network effect, which I talked about. Yeah? So the input then feeds into the output for another user. So very simple diagram, right? If you want to understand what is a growth loop, this is the image to look at. So you have an input at the very top. A new user does something in your product. They create some sort of activity. Then they have an action or a step, right, where the result of that activity feeds into the output. So let's look at an example. Uber, right, everyone's familiar with that, or Bolt, some ride-sharing app. You have the input where a rider joins, right, and they get on the app, they see how many cars there are to take them to their destination. That action, that input that they've taken, increases the demand, right? Because when the drivers see larger demand, they're more likely to join Uber and put up their ride for rent. The action is the more rides they book, right? More drivers join, right? Demand gets higher, supply tends to match it. And lastly, the output then is the pickup time increases because the number of drivers, as they increase, it's going to be a shorter wait for you for any next user for the next ride that they want to take. Yeah. So that's an example of a loop. You see that you as a product team, as a company, are not doing anything explicitly to the product. You've built in a mechanism where users, by their actions, are improving the acquisition, the conversion, the engagement of your subsequent users. Okay. This is not specific to Uber, right? Most B2B, most B2C tech products are using this now. So short comparison between the two, traditional sales funnel versus growth loop, right? So funnels are a good starting point, especially if you want to understand the steps your customer goes through when they initially hear about your product. The drawback of the funnel as well is that it can create a short-term value mentality, meaning you're thinking about how many customers can I take through the funnel, right? How many can I attract? How many can I get them to realize the product value and then eventually then pay, right? Make that decision to pay. It also creates, especially in sales, you have this notion of closing X number of accounts, right? So you have traditional companies that set goals like that. So as a sales team, your goal is to close 50 accounts. With the funnel, it makes sense, right? Because they only go through the loop or through the funnel once. With the loop, on the other hand, you want to keep them in your ecosystem for as long as possible, increasing the lifetime value of a customer. Yeah, so they don't just go through it once. The intent is to continuously provide them with value. And that's the big difference, right? So, like I said, it's mostly relevant for commoditized SaaS products. So things that are very commonly used, like Uber. The reason for that is the product or the service needs to be really self-evident. So there needs to be very little friction from the time the user first learns about it, they try it out for the first time. They need to be able to understand what is the product, what it does. If it's a very complicated product, you probably need to build in some sales motions into it. So this is why with growth loops, it works best with commoditized or commoditizing tech products. And the last point is long-term user value develops over time, right? Without a lot of input from you as a company, as an individual selling that product. Yeah, this is one of the big pluses. All right, so all clear about loops. We're going to talk about the leaky bucket analogy, which is this, right? So imagine there's water flowing into a bucket with a couple different holes. Let's say the water coming out of the tap represents acquisition, so new customers coming in to your business. The conversion is how much water falls into the bucket. So the new people that are interested in your product, how many of them say, okay, your product is something I would be interested in? That's conversion. And then retention is how many people stay with your product. Right? Do they just use it once? Do they use it every day? Do they use it every month? Right? That's retention. So the leaky bucket that you see in this image shows that retention is low, right? And if you have low retention, meaning users either don't use your product after they learn about it, or they only use it once or twice, that's low value realization long term for your product. So, quick question for everyone. Which product would you rather own? Product A, product B?
B.
Who said that? Who was B?
I said B.
Oh, why? Why B?
Because you want to have a recurring income stream instead of having to put energy in every time.
Okay. What's the difference here, though, between those two?
Oh, I was thinking about, I didn't look at the graphs, I was thinking about your other stuff.
No, we're just talking about this image right
Okay,
here.
and I never said anything.
Right. So it was a trick question. They're both the same, right? So
exactly.
if you look at it very closely, they are the same. It was a trick question. I have another question, a follow-up. Now, which one would you rather own? Product A or product B?
B.
Okay, and everyone said B. Anyone saying A?
I guess it depends what's the potential of retaining the new users long term. I mean, if you change your, product A has more potential if you can retain.
If you can retain.
If.
Being the key. Okay, so people saying product B, why are you saying product B?
It's safer.
Why is it safer?
I mean, you have already people coming back, so that means you don't need so much effort to keep bringing new people in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would die.
Yeah. So they're retaining, right?
Yeah.
Same concept.
And
What
also,
if,
you
what
also
if
have
product
some-
B kills your customers?
Kills your customers.
And they wouldn't be returned.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Well, they will be dead next week.
They probably won't be using it long term, right? You were saying something.
Yeah, I think product B also shows that you have a working idea. So
Yeah.
you have something that works, that is proven, and that will bring more customers
Yeah.
because it's working.
Yeah, exactly, right? So all that is true. Go ahead.
In product B, you can also use affiliate structures because you know you have happy users. So the LTV of a user is more valuable, but you can also get more out of the users through the affiliate structures that you can put in because you know they're fans.
Yeah, so you have different tactics, right? Different sales growth tactics that you can use with product B because they're coming back. So you know your product is valuable, they're saying that by using it more often, by coming back, by maybe paying more, whatever it may be, right? So, good. The key concept here is retention, right? So when we go back to that leaky bucket analogy, retention was those holes in the bucket. We're plugging those holes. Product B has plugged that. Not too leaky, their bucket. Product A, it's a pretty leaky product, right? Because customers are not retaining. They're using it, they're learning about it, maybe converting for a day or two, and then they say, you know what, whatever, I'm not so interested. I found an alternative, or it's not solving my problem.
How do you consider a returning user? Because, for example, I have a SaaS and people are paying every month, so I consider them as returning, but I'm not sure they are really returning. Maybe
That's a very product specific answer, right? So every product, even some products have different definitions for retention, but it's important that you agree on what is that definition, right? When you say retention, what does that mean? There's some concepts I'll talk about later, but stickiness is a good one. It means daily active users divided by monthly active users, right? So that's a very common metric used to look at retention.
Thank you.
So, by now, hopefully you understand, when we talk about these three steps, right, even if you think about a sales funnel, at the top you have acquisition, in the middle you have conversion, towards the end you have retention. You want to first start by optimizing retention, right? So you want to plug in those holes, make sure that your bucket isn't leaky, so that the water that falls into it actually stays in the bucket long term. Okay? So you fix the leaky bucket, you focus on retention, you look at the different retention metrics, and you try to optimize that first. Before you try to acquire more customers, before you try to convert them, this is the first thing you want to work on.
And just a question, is like any standard in the industry where it's about, in terms of like development, where you say like 20% should be like new features, 80 like fixed bugs or like fixed problems?
There isn't, because that depends on your product strategy, right? So if you have a new product, that percentage is probably higher for new features, right? What companies often forget is that you can add value by removing features, right? So Microsoft Word, the online version, did a good job of showing that. It was so clunky, and then when Nadella came on as a CEO, he made it super simple, Google Docs style, right? And it took off from there. So it really depends on your product strategy, what stage of the life cycle it's at. So there is no one answer there. So once you fix retention at the bottom, you want to optimize conversion, right? How much water is actually staying in the bucket. We'll look at some metrics in a bit, and then lastly, the acquisition. That's the last thing you want to fix. You don't want to spend your money and your resources and have multiple teams around customer acquisition before you fix retention and then conversion, right? Or else new customers come in, your product is not good enough, and they leak away, right? They churn. So acquisition measures, CAC, LTV. CAC is customer acquisition costs. How much money does it cost you to bring in a customer to the product? LTV is lifetime value. So in the lifetime of your customer's usage of your product, what is the total value, right? How much money do they bring to your company? That ratio of 1 to 3 is a standard good benchmark for industry. You want to have that, so for every $1 that you spend to acquire a customer, you want them to bring in $3 through product usage, through referral, whatever it may be, right? That's a good industry standard. However, that measure of CAC to LTV is sometimes loaded with assumptions. So you're assuming that once they onboard into your product, they're going to continue using it, right? That's a huge if. And that's one of the pitfalls with that. It can also lead to some cost fallacy, right? So you've invested money into acquiring new customers, and now you want to invest more to make them use your product, right? So you keep spending more money, and then eventually they leak out of your bucket. And so you've lost a lot of money, right? That's the sunk cost fallacy there. And the third one, I kind of hinted at that, so past performance doesn't guarantee future performance. Meaning that if your customer was really using your product intensely in the first week, it does not mean that every subsequent week they're going to use it to the same degree. So that's the reason CAC to LTV is not the best indicator of customer value for your product. What you can use if you want to see the acquisition is payback period or payback velocity, right? So how quickly do you make back the money that you spend to acquire the customer? So that $1 you spent to acquire this person, how quickly do you make it back? Does it take a day? Does it take a week? Does it take months? Yeah, so the quicker you make it back, the better your product's potential value, right? And the thing with this metric is that it's leading, and so it's very constant day to day, whereas the past one we looked at, CAC to LTV, it's a very lagging metric. You won't know what those numbers are until they've churned. So it could be years down the line until you see what this is. So use payback period velocity as an acquisition measure to understand what is your customer's potential value that they're going to bring. This is a good B2B SaaS heuristic there. So exceptional at the bottom means that the amount you spend to bring in a customer, on the first purchase, you make that money back. Right? So you don't wait weeks or months to get it back. And then you see great, good, and okay. So when we think about acquisition, right, the tap, the water flowing out of the tap, this is a very good metric for that. Conversion. I talked about stickiness already, DAU, MAU, that stands for daily active users or monthly active users. You have some other ones, so how session length, right? How long are they engaged in your software, in your product? Task success rate, so you create scenarios for them to complete. How, what percentage of those tasks are they able to complete? This ties to friction, because if your product is very clunky, it's very difficult to navigate, that task success rate will be quite low for them. So some conversion metrics you can look at to see how successful your current product's conversion is. And then lastly, retention, right? So the churn rate is a good one. How often they renew, right? Are they renewing every time, or is it every other year they come back? New feature adoption rate is also indicative as well of how invested they are into your product, how likely they are to use the new features you put out there. All right, so in summary, what the things I've talked about so far. Firstly, when you are going to market, you want to identify the details behind the 3 core elements. Does anyone remember what those 3 were?
Product marketing.
And sales, yes, good. So you want to think around not just those 3 individually, but how they combine to work together and how you can leverage the decisions to go to a new market. You want to then visualize the customer journey, right? A classic sales funnel can be a good start, but don't stop there, right? So start with the funnel, identify what are their steps, the steps they're using to go through your product, how quickly can they realize the value, the core product value that you have, and then try to get them from A to B the quickest, right? So try to get them to realize the product value as quickly as possible. Ensure that your bucket isn't leaky, right? We looked at different measures you can have for acquisition, conversion, and retention. Start with retention, use those measures. If it's not so good, try to fix that first before you move to conversion and then acquisition. Identify opportunities for growth loops in your product, right? It's a bit of a cheat code, right? Having network effects in your product where the input and the triggers from one user lead to better experience for the next user. Try to identify opportunities for that. And lastly, scale effective loops, your different motions. This one's a big topic, right? So you have different product-led growth motions, you have product-led sales motions, freemium, trials, interactive demos, those are all examples. But those are all things that you can use after you've fixed your leaky bucket. Once your product is delivering value constantly and your users are retaining, right, then you can scale the effectiveness of those growth loops by using different product-led growth motions. So that's a big topic. There are different trainings and things for that in itself. So in summary, this is the success recipe for a successful go-to-market. And lastly, if you took nothing away from this talk, right, please keep this in mind, inspect and adapt your approach based on learnings. So this is not a mathematical formula or science. At the end of the day, the learnings you get from the market, from what your users tell you about your product, about their needs, try to apply that, try to work back into your product somehow. So that's it. Thank you. And this QR code links to my website, my LinkedIn, everything's there. So happy to stay connected and continue discussion about your specific product.